Hey, Paul, how are you?
Doing great, great.
Good. Uh, we've already been talking for a few minutes, but just hit record. And thanks for taking the time this morning. We're going to be talking about your piece, Breath of Life, and I can't tell you. I know I've told you this before, but how much I appreciate your music and enjoy getting to work on these pieces. I think this is the third premiere that I think with you, and was Returning the Echo. That was not a premiere. That was you had done that before, I think. Anyway, so but a number of pieces with you, and I just always enjoy your work. So just a quick synopsis, and then we'll get into some details. But why this piece? Why now?
Yeah. This grew out of a collaboration with Tony Offerly, who'll be singing the premiere. He's a terrific bass baritone on the faculty with me at UF. We had done, 2 decades ago, some Hebrew songs that I wrote like in the 90s. I mean, some of the first things that I've wrote that I still admit to having written. And we performed them here, and then we performed them again. We were asked to do a little event a couple years back, and he came to me afterwards and said, I love singing your music. I love you singing my music. So let's make this happen more. So it was partially just having a talented performer who wanted more to do. And so I wanted to craft something specifically for him. And then the idea for the piece itself, it was kind of pandemic inspired to some degree. Just like facing this respiratory illness. It was I don't mean to make light of things, but like suddenly singing became like the most dangerous thing you could do for a while.
Right.
And as a musician teaching at a university, that was a really kind of striking and bizarre thing. It got me thinking about just the idea of breath in various ways. I started meditating a few years back, and the practice I've been doing has you focus on the breath as kind of an initial step. In talking to Tony, that's where he starts voice lessons. It just seemed like this was a really interesting place to explore things thematically.
Right.
And we'll get into the details, I think, but like I also had this idea of various harmonic progressions that had this sense of kind of inhale, exhale,
Sure.
which was kind of, I felt like I had a nice musical metaphor, a musical encapsulation of this basic idea.
Yeah, that's really cool. Anytime we study works, I'm always sort of curious, whether it's in the past or now. We're so lucky we get to talk to you and find out. But I love knowing sort of that, was this something that was in the zeitgeist or what was going on? And I think everything, like you said, kind of came together, right, with Tony. And then breath was definitely something we were thinking a lot about during COVID and in many ways, and so really cool. So this is a work with voice and orchestra, which means there has to be text and something sung. Now, having studied the score, believe it or not, I do study your scores before the first rehearsal. Sometimes, sometimes we wing it, but no. But knowing that you've got six different texts in here, how did you come to those texts? And was it one of I'm always curious, did it just come to you, oh, these are the ones I'm going to use, or was there a little bit of searching going on?
It was a mix. I had this idea. I went searching for some poems, but there's a couple of Hebrew texts that I also then present in English that I knew I wanted to use right away. One at the beginning, a creation story where God forms man, breathing into his nostrils, and man is created. So I wanted to begin the piece with this idea. I wanted to address breath at a variety of different levels, and there's a mystical part of it. There's the very sort of practical things with other poems. The other Hebrew thing was from Psalm 150, let everything that has breath praise the Lord. So I knew I wanted those. And then it was really about doing some research, and I found a fun statement, breathing is the greatest pleasure in life, that's been attributed to Giovanni Papini, who's an Italian intellectual in the middle of the 20th century. I don't think we know if he actually said it. I don't
Right.
know. We know if he said it in English or Italian, right?
Sure.
But I decided to put it in Italian and English both, and that's really kind of just a playful diversion in the middle of the piece.
Right.
Then the poems that I found, the one that I found first, I'd actually encountered Mark O'Brien's work before. He was a poet who passed away in the 90s and had this remarkable collection called The Man in the Iron Lung,
Yeah.
which was his, as far as I can tell, his personal account. And this sounds like just this archaic, horrible thing that people in the past had to live through. But the fact that this guy was alive in an iron lung very much during my lifetime was kind of a striking thing.
Yeah.
A remarkable poet, and he equates his experience of not being able to breathe. There's all these water metaphors as if he's sort of drowning underwater.
Sure.
I think to try to make the sense of just this thing that we all take for granted.
Yeah.
Boy, if you stop taking it for granted, and think about how precious it is for somebody for whom breathing is a real difficulty, is really poignant. So that's the first substantive part of the piece.
Right.
It's there's and then I knew I wanted something about meditation. So in the middle, there's a poem about breathing, and the final poem, and they all conveniently have the title breath or breathing. I mean, something, to do with breath directly. So that's Dana Folds was the poet of the middle piece, and then the final piece was this remarkable conversation between a person and the wind.
Okay.
So part of the pandemic trigger of breath was people walking in the streets chanting, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," right, as a protest. And
Yeah.
in this final poem, the wind is telling a person to breathe, and the person's getting increasingly upset. Why are you telling me to breathe? How can you breathe at a time like this? And there's so much injustice, and the air is filled with smoke, and and the wind finally says, "I didn't tell you to be calm. I said to breathe."
Wow. Yeah.
And yeah, and it was a really sort of poignant summing up of a lot of the thoughts I had surrounding this. So yeah, so I grabbed those texts from all over, reached out to the poets or the estates of the poets for permissions and all that stuff.
Right. Wow, that's a whole nother subject, by the way, the estates. I'm really curious about some of that, but it's Mark O'Brien. I knew a little bit about him. I think I first heard about him on This American Life, the NPR show. I think he was featured on an episode of that. But it's funny when I saw his name in here. It's a bit of a stretch, but you know me, I tend to stretch things a little bit. But the idea, I mean, he was in an iron lung. I think he got polio, right, at a relatively young age, and then still was able to go to college. Was a journalist, did all these incredible things, and it to me, I mean, what he did was incredibly remarkable. I think about what you do as a composer, and I'm not comparing you to Mark O'Brien, but this idea that you're constrained in so many ways, but you must have all these ideas that you want to get out on paper. And it's just interesting, and that's what I love about composition. Sometimes is just this idea that whether it was classical music or romantic music, and we're trying to stay within a form, or we're composing under a court system or a political system where we can't do certain things, and we're still trying to find ways. Or we work in academia and we're super busy. I know you teach like 1 million classes and do your kids are doing wonderful things, and but you still find ways to get your message and music out. And I just always find that incredibly inspiring when composers are able to do that. So do you feel that way? Do you feel like composition is a way sometimes of maybe you're constrained and you're trying to get through, whether it's musically or anything else? Does that any of that resonate? Or
yeah, it does. I mean, to say I'm constrained makes it sound like this is some heroic venture. It's not. It's like
no, I think being an artist is a heroic venture, but that's a whole nother that's a different podcast or something we'll talk about. But yeah, so I know, not constrained, but there are boundaries, right? That we have to deal with, whether it's the ensemble we're working with or the subject or anything,
I and maybe this is just the composition teacher in me, but I find the font of creativity for me is inside of those constraints.
Yeah.
Just, and often what I need to do is sort of put boundaries around the projects that I'm doing.
Right.
And those can be, there's certain like practical boundaries, like a piece can only be so long or for so many instruments or whatever, but also technical boundaries, like I'm going to explore this thing and not all these other things, and then try to kind of find the music inside of whatever constraints I put in place. It's part of the reason I like working with text a lot, is that it imposes some of those boundaries. And then, and I really love the challenge. I mean, I think composing for me in some ways feels like solving puzzles.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it's a deeply rewarding activity for me. It's like therapeutic and whatever else. Yeah, I mean, given if I was in charge of the world, I'd just spend all my time composing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I love that idea of like, it's like solving puzzles. That's how I feel as a conductor studying scores. I feel the same way. Like I'm just trying to solve the puzzle you've already solved, but you don't want to tell anyone the answer. So it's, you put it in these black dots, and, we've got to kind of solve it. I think that's really, really exciting. It reminds me of being a young drummer, and and you've got your sort of your bag of tricks of fills, and if you're constrained in a way, that I can't just do a fill in every bar. I can't. Here's everything I got. Here's all the notes I got. Oh, I got this thing with the. No, it's a matter of when to use what, and to judiciously do that and make those choices. And I think good composers know that, right? A lot of tricks that sound cool, but you can't put them all together. That's really cool. When you mentioned working with text, when you're in this manner, you've got a unifying theme of breath. And so musically, there's that idea, this unifying idea of breath, but then you've got 6 different texts, and some coming from Hebrew text, some coming from more modern poets and writers. How do you thread that needle musically? As the listener is going to listen to this piece, is there a unifying thread? Do we feel these 6 distinct areas, or?
I'm hoping that it's kind of both things. This is about a 22-minute piece or so. So that would be a long single thread.
Right.
So there are 6 distinct sections. Maybe we'll call them movements, but it's all played attacca. It's all continuous.
Sure.
And I wanted this piece to cover a lot of ground. So I wanted each of those to be a distinct musical universe, using their own techniques. But I also want this to feel like a continuous whole and a logical whole. So I actually approached this the way that I approach operas in some way, is that I took the whole text and looked for consistent themes, things that showed up across the boundaries of these different texts. So there's ideas of creation, whether that's like creativity type creation or like God creation.
Sure.
There's obviously the idea of breathing, and I interpreted that in a couple of different ways. I tried to address sort of levels of constraint and freedom, just in like the pitch choices that I use. There's some kind of clustered, really tight things that to me represented difficulty breathing or difficulty getting through something, challenge. And then there's these very open sonorities that would represent the opposite. So in that way, what I do is I like the text all printed up and went through with pencil and just sort of marked themes that could show up in different places, so that I knew as I was composing, use the breath theme here or whatever.
Yeah, really cool. Really. I know you work with you do a lot of stuff with vocalists, whether it's operas and songs and different things. Do you think do you think different musically? I mean, obviously the text is important, so you want the text to be heard. So you're thinking, I'm sure you're thinking balance with the orchestra. You're thinking now with a voice like Tony's, could sing over 100 trombones would be fine, right? But still, I'm not suggesting you write a piece for 100 trombones. That would be, no one would buy tickets. No, I'm just kidding. They probably would. Anyways, but you must obviously think about that, and it must be. I always wonder, is it different musically for you? Like, do the melodies need to be a little bit different, or I guess the emphasis of the melody or the phrase has to be different because you're matching that phrase with a text. I mean, I know I'm just sort of an open-ended question, but you must think about that a lot.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's important to me that the text be understood.
Mhm.
I mean, it's even important that the languages that I don't speak and that I don't expect my audience are going to speak are true to the emphasis. I don't speak Hebrew, but through my background, I pronounce Hebrew.
Been around it a little bit. So.
Been around, right? So, yeah, if it is, my father's a cantor, so I
Right.
kind of grew up with sacred Jewish music. And with the Italian, actually, you'll see this when we get with Tony. He speaks Italian, and he's going to adjust some of the syllable placement just slightly to try to make this sound sort of very authentically in the spot. So with with any text, and certainly with the English text, which is most of the piece,
right.
I'm imagining how this is spoken.
Okay.
Word emphasis is really important, and it triggers for me the placement of pitches in a melody. I don't compose some melody and then try to cram words to it.
Right.
The words are there first, and I'm making a melody that I feel like fits those words.
Very cool.
Yeah, and often it's a matter of literally like speaking the line over and over and figuring out where emphasis is, and then adjusting to the conceit that, in a sung situation, sometimes we're going to stretch things far longer than we would saying them.
Sure. Rhythmically, I always find your music just extremely exciting. I mean, any piece of yours I've heard. This piece is no different. You're constantly combining duples and triples, and constantly doing rhythms that, frankly, when you look at them and you think of the math of them, I always think of rhythm as sort of a math problem, and it can look or sound theoretically sound very complicated, but in practice it never does. It always feels very natural. It's one of the things that I really like about your music, and there are certain sections of the orchestra that I think enjoy rhythmic challenges, and others that enjoy that less. But what I love about your work is that even those sections that I think this might be a rhythmically challenging, this might be challenging, it tends to come off really well with the orchestra. Now, they may practice it a million times at home. I don't know, but there's something about the way you write that works like that. So I'm always curious how you think about rhythm and what rhythm brings to your music. And do you feel your rhythmic language is unique, or does that make sense? Like, is it unified? Yeah.
I don't know that it's unique. I mean, I'm inspired by a lot of specifically American music. I mean, I think I would attribute a lot of what I do to having listened to a good amount of Copland and Bernstein growing up.
There's some interesting rhythms there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's maybe if there's like that's not uniquely American, but a distinctly American thing is the treatment of rhythm. I mean, it comes from a variety of sources, right? But that's what I kind of grew up with, along with being a rock musician when I was a kid. So I kind of, that's present, but that's present for a lot of contemporary composers. I spent a lot of time on rhythm. I think that's maybe it. I feel like, and often what I start with are more kind of regularized rhythms.
Okay.
And part of my composition process is to try to make things as compelling as possible. So I take those regularized rhythms and morph them. It needs to feel organic for me. Like, I play through every part and I sing through everything because it needs to feel like something that, if I were on the spot, I could make sound musical. So that's criteria number one. And if the best thing is just a bunch of whole notes, then it'll be a bunch of whole notes. But for me, that's a place where I think it's instantly perceptible to an audience that there's something, to something, if something throws you off a little bit, defies expectations a little bit.
Yes.
I I hope that keeps things engaging. That's what I'm aiming for.
No, I think that last comment that hits it on the head for me for what makes music exciting, right? Is when you're listening and you think, oh, I know where this is going, and you're marching along, and all of a sudden there's two left foots in a row, and you go, wait, I thought, what did you just do? And then that's the exciting moment. That's where you go, oh, that was cool. I think that's what makes those moments happen. And I think that's I love that idea that you sort of start with one thing and then maybe start tweaking, playing, morphing, and again with the goal of finding what's the most musically compelling, right? I think, when does that process stop for you? I mean, obviously you put a double bar on the piece, but do you ever go like in the premiere go, I wish I had done a couple more, this, that, I mean, that,
Um, yeah, I mean, I've certainly looked back on pieces and feel like I could have, should have, whatever, and I have revised some older pieces occasionally too. But yeah, I mean, part of the process stops because you just, in the process of composing, you play through, listen through things over and over, and at a certain point, this is a danger, but at a certain point, like anything can sound right if you do it over and over enough, right? So
yeah.
But yeah, that's a perpetual thing. When do you add the last brushstroke to a painting or whatever?
Right.
Right. Yeah, I think I learned this from David Del Tredici, who's a terrific composer. And he talked about just playing through his pieces over and over and over again, kind of semi-improvising and tweaking until and he writes these gargantuan pieces. I would love to be sitting there watching him play these 40-minute pieces over and over, right?
Right. 7 years later, he makes
exactly. He said, there's like a certain point where you're playing it and it's like, I just played this whole thing through and it's the same as the last time and the same as the time before. It's like, and that's kind of where it's like something stops and you're like, yeah, this is, there's no, at least to me, there's no sort of like inevitable correct version of something. I'm just aiming for something that I feel like sits right.
Yeah, sure. I think our industry, we tend to not think of our older music, some of, classical romantic era music as being that way, but I think it was exactly the same way. And we see that with every premiere of pieces that were constantly being not necessarily always technically revised, but things approached differently. And that's one of the things I love about this time in history, I guess, in scientific and musical history, is that we actually have recordings going back now 120, 140 years in some cases, where we can go, well, that's how it was done in 1895, but in 1935 this started happening, in and it's really kind of exciting to see that. So it's neat to hear from a composer's perspective that same ideas are the same ideas are happening, and yeah, really exciting. I think I tell you this too much. You must come away with it, but I'm so excited about this piece and working with Tony on it. What can you say about Tony? That hasn't been said. No, but he's an incredible voice, but he's a fun person to work with too, right? It's just.
Yeah, he's a dear friend. Tony and I have been on the faculty together for I don't know when he joined, 20 years ago, something like that. I mean, we've been friends and colleagues and artistic partners for a long time. Tony's a bass baritone, which most men are baritones. Most men can't hit the low notes that he can hit, and make them sound good. And I mean, it's fun for me because he's got this gargantuan range. It's the range that I have, but I don't have any tone. Like, what I sound like, when people sing in the shower and they think they sound great. Yeah, right. So his voice is super easy for me to write for because I basically write for myself and then it sounds better. We've worked together on a variety of different things. So like I said, I feel like I can conjure up the sound of his voice pretty easily.
Right.
And one thing that I've appreciated for a long time and have noticed in some recent projects, is he's got a tremendous flexibility, just all these different colors that can come out. Yes. There are a lot of great singers out there who always sing bingo, the same exact tone. Every time they sing an F sharp, it sounds exactly like that.
Like a sample. It's you're getting your. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's just got all of this flexibility and like a playfulness with his voice. So part of this, we talked about this piece together. I basically wrote it and then sent it to him, but and then he gave me some feedback and we adjusted some things. But the conception of the piece was definitely, let's give you a vehicle for doing all these things you can do, hitting those crazy low notes,
Sure.
this incredible sustain, this playful character and the serious character, all that kind of stuff. I wanted to make sure that that was all kind of there for him to be able to really show what he's capable of.
Yeah, I think you hit that on the head too with Tony's. He's able to do all those things, not just the musical challenges, but the story challenges, the emotional challenges. I've seen, we over the years seen him sing things that are he's very funny. He can be very funny and very playful, and then some very, very serious things as well, which so I'm looking forward to that. The other thing I love about Tony's voice, and I think Tony's really this happens all the time, but it's the first person that made me realize this is, having been able to hear him over the last decade and a half or 2 decades, his voice changes and grows, and in a very good way. Like I'm sure I'm not a huge wine drinker, but like a fine wine must. That the longer it's in the bottle, it's growing, and new things open up, and I love talking to Tony about that too, because he'll recognize, he said, yeah, I didn't think I'd ever be able to do this. And then this thing happens. And then the other day I was practicing and this happened, and it's just kind of cool to see that continually happen. Which, I mean, maybe it's like a violin, that once it's 300 or 400 years old and it's the wood grains align in a way that it resonates differently. I don't know. Not that Tony's 400 years old. I think he's a little less than 50, yeah. But it's just so cool to hear that, like you said, that voice develop and all the nuance that he's able to put into his singing. And I think, obviously it was the goal, but I think all of that nuance exists in this piece, from the very, very soft, breathy, almost whispered music to very boisterous and big stuff. It's all in this 21 minutes. So I think the audience is really in for a journey. One of the things I really like are sort of some of all the melismatic passages that you have in here, which, as someone who's not a great singer at all, you've heard me sight singing before, but as someone who really does not have a good voice, I'm always amazed at those types of passages where singers can just sustain in one breath all these different notes and move through with agility and anyway. So I think that'll be exciting to hear Tony.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm excited to hear him sing through it too.
Yeah. All right. Paul, I've taken up half an hour of your time. Anything else that our audience should know about the piece? It's written for a full orchestra with harp and percussionist and full complement of winds and brass and strings, of course. Anything else you'd want them to know before they hear this piece for the first time?
Yeah, it is a big piece, and that was definitely part of the goal in exploring all these various areas. I'm hoping that it's a multi-layered experience.
Yeah,
I was thinking about things on all these different levels. I hope that some of that comes through. That it's thought-provoking and hopefully moving in various ways. That's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah. I think I know I ask you this every time we do a piece together, but that anticipation of the premiere of a piece must be kind of both exciting and scary, almost like the birth of a child. Where it's coming, and it's going to be a happy day, but there's all kinds of things that you must be feeling, like, what's this child going to be when he or she's 30? What are they going to do? I mean, I don't know, all these things that you could just go forever. And it must be like that for birthing a piece, this, what is the audience going to hear? Those the multi-layered messaging and not just musically, but thematically. And I know we don't write or perform for people to necessarily like what we do, but I'm sure we want them to like what we do too. There's some of that, and so I don't envy you, but I know our audience is going to love this, as they always love your work, and so I'm excited, but you must be too, I'm sure. Yeah.
I am, and I know the piece is in good hands.
Well,
Having worked with you and worked with Ocala before, you're terrific. It's a talented bunch of musicians. I feel very confident that this is going to do what I was hoping it would.
sure. One thing that you write a lot in some of your pieces is some slow sections, quarter note equals 40. Paul, that is so slow, and it makes me so nervous. I just think this is why every time you come to the first rehearsal, I go, Paul, is that tempo okay? Because 40, who can count quarter note equals 40? I mean, so I'm always thinking, okay, that means the eighth notes are 80, and I get so nerdy about it, and I freak out about it, and then you go, that was great, it was great, it's fine, it's great, it's great. Every time I'm like, what? But anyways, it's one of the reasons I love your works, because I feel like they keep me on my toes. And I know we talked about rhythm, but one quick thing about tempo with your pieces too. It's not always like metric modulations or anything like that, but there always does seem to be a really natural flow of tempo in your works, and you must think about that to some degree too, a little bit. But that's sorry, just looking through this and remembering some previous stuff we've done, where even though I'm joking about being nervous about, does this feel good? The music tends to lend itself to the tempo, or vice versa. The tempo lends itself to the music. Does that make sense? Like there's certain melodies you hear in works and you go, that has to go this tempo. There's no other. And I don't know. Do you think about that, or does anything like that land?
Yeah. Contemporary composers, we can use computer playback, right?
Sure.
And I use a metronome when I'm composing, or sort of an internal metronome, and try to find the right thing. And then, so there is this kind of check. But computers always kind of sound lousy. So,
and computers, they don't need to breathe, right? No pun intended here with this piece, but they don't breathe. So it's a different, yeah.
But, so I do have that tool, and I do use it to just sort of see if things feel right, as opposed to me like sitting at the piano with the metronome going, is this, how does this feel musically? But yeah, I think I don't really think there's a whole lot of mystery. I'm sure to people who don't compose, like, I don't sculpt. Sculpting seems mysterious to me, right? Like,
right.
It can seem really mysterious, but for me, there's just something sort of natural about the melody comes, and it really only feels right at the speed at which it sort of, that I first conceive of it. So
no,
that's part of the process. And the 40s, go ahead and pulse the eighth notes, man. It's fine.
Pulse the eighth notes. Well, it's fine to pulse the eighth notes, but then you write triplets. So then that's, Paul, we're going to talk about this offline. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's great. No, I think that idea that okay, pulse the eighth notes, feel the inner pulses, even when there's triplets. I think that lends to some of the natural feeling of these rhythms that on paper, if I just put this in a computer, I'd say, well, this is going to rhythmically sound ambiguous, but it never feels that way with your music. And I think it really is because of the tempi, and because of the way the rhythms cascade into the other. So I mentioned you use the duples and the triples, but that lends itself to a natural accelerando or retardando. Those things happen, and I think I think anyways, it's just, to me, it's a unique character of your music that I really enjoy. In addition to the harmonica, you always have interesting harmonies that work. And I always go, is this in D Dorian? And then you're like, yeah, maybe. I don't know. I just wrote the damn thing. I don't know. Oh, excuse me, I can't say it. Anyways, but we'll beep that out. But anyways, as you can tell, I'm excited for this piece, and I really rehearsals will be great. And I can tell you, the musicians are excited. The musicians are excited. They love playing your Symphony of Selves back in, what was that, 22 maybe, or last, which feels like forever ago. It wasn't that long ago, but anyway, so they're excited about this. And I just thank you, Paul, for giving us the opportunity to play the piece and all that. So very excited.
Thank you. And me too.